Okay, and you can see everything works fine if we restart the game. Still got our everything going, the enemies coming back. This tutorial is going to cover setting up a start and restart screen in the game. The first thing we'll do is set up panels in the canvas. We'll then jump into the code and set up some functions and also add some health to the player so that we can see the restart screen. So let's get right into it. In the canvas, I'm going to create a UI panel and I'm going to call this one the start panel. Now I'm going to make this a solid color. Make it whatever color you want. It could be dark color, might make it a bit purpley. And we need a button, so we need to create a UI button text mesh pro. If we have a look in our scene, here's our button. Let's expand it a bit. I might chuck this somewhere down here. And we'll just set the text to play. Make it a bit bigger. Awesome. So this is our play button. Now you might also want to add some, I don't know, some text or an image or something up the top. And it's really up to you to design your sort of start screen. I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's the sort of thing you could expect. So UI text mesh pro. Let's go like not ghost pop. Just make that a bit bigger. Can center it. Even go like cool. No, whoops, I can't spell. Not ghost pop. Cool. So I'm also going to go ahead and duplicate this, and this can be our restart panel. Might change the color of it. You know, since you die, you might want it to be a bit of a reddy color. And you can basically just change this text. Might make it smaller and be like, oh no, you died. Something like that. And we might even change the play button text so it could say restart. Okay, very simple. You obviously have creative choice. It is your game. The first issue we'll come across is if we try to play it for different types of games, you can see everything goes out of whack. So portrait, everything goes really big and really small. So if we click on the canvas itself, we can change the canvas scalar. So change that to scale with screen size. So the reference resolution we want is 1920 by 1080. And we can match the width or height at 0.5. So it's about even. And the reference pixels per unit, it doesn't matter too much unless you want a pixel based game or pixel art game, then you'd set it to the size of your sprites or the resolutions that you're using. So if you're using a 32 by 32 sprite, you'd be setting this reference to 32 as you would with the image. So this is 512, so I could set it to that if I wanted to. So I'm just gonna hide this one and we can leave the start panel up, which is fine. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna edit our UI controller script. So let's head into that. So the first thing we wanna do in here is we wanna create some references to our panels. So we're gonna have private game object, and this can be our start panel. Set that equal to null, and we can also do the same thing. Oop. If you press Shift Alt or hold Shift Alt and then press the down button, it duplicates the code that you've just typed in. So I can just type restart panel. Okay, so once we've got those, I'm gonna close this for a second and create a couple of new voids. So the first one is gonna be public void start game. So this is going to control starting the game. So we can go start panel.set active to false. Okay, because we want to, when we start the actual game, we don't want the panel to show up anymore. And we also need a value that we change that determines whether the game is paused or not. So we can control that inside the game controller. So what we're going to go and do is open up our game controller and we can create a new value in here. So I'm going to go private static ball. We'll call this game paused. It's going to equal to false. And we can create a public reference to it as well. So public static ball game paused. It's going to equal to, we're going to get our game paused, and we're going to set our game paused equal to a value. Now we want to make sure we set that to a capital for game paused. And so now we can update this game paused value, and that can control a bunch of stuff by doing something like this. If not game paused, then we want our difficulty multiplier to increase. And we'll change that for just about every other script in our game. So I'm also going to go game controller dot game paused is going to equal to false. So the game is not paused. But how do we start the game as paused? Because by default, the game's not going to be paused. So we could set it to true. So our game is now paused. And back in our UI controller, that's fine because our game's paused at the very start. So we want to copy this exact function. And I'm just going to call it restart game. And we're going to do the exact same thing, but I'm putting it in a separate function because later on you might want to do slightly different things depending on how you have your game set up. So it's easier if we put it at the start to have everything reference individual functions. So now that we're able to pause the game, we need to make it so we can pause the game after we've started our game. So how do we restart our game, or how do we get to a point where we can restart our game? That would be when the player dies. So in our enemy controller, if we open that one up, we need to allow the enemy to attack the player, and then we need to give the player health. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to serialize field and create a private float. This can be our attack range. Set that to 0.5f. And I also want another ball, but I'll make this private. So private ball is attacking. I'm going to set that to false. So in our update void, the first thing we want to do is we want to check if the game is not paused. So if not game controller dot game paused, and we can wrap it around in some curly braces. Just like so. But we also want another if statement inside of this. And this can be checking our attack range and then initiating an attack. So if we are targeting the player and our vector3.distance from our transform.position to the player's position is less than or equal to our attack range, and we are not is attacking, so we are not attacking, then we're going to set is attacking to true, and then we can start a simple coroutine that we will create, and I'll just call it attack. So now let's create the attack coroutine. So private IE numerator attack. So what we're going to do is yield return new, wait for seconds. Now you can obviously change this if you don't want your enemy to attack in this way, but we're just going to set it so every certain amount of time, which is random between two variables, so 0.5f and 2f. After that time has passed, then we will attack. So we have to go player dot get component health component dot update health, and we can set like maybe -5f, so you can change that value. And then we want to set is attacking equal to false, so we can start this coroutine again. Now that we have our enemy controller being able to attack, we need an endgame function for when the game finishes once we lose all of our health. And this can be ignited within our health component. So we need to open that one up. So we've got here for the enemy, but we need another one for the player. So if GameObject.tag is equal to player, then we're going to set our current health equal to the max health, so we can restart it and it only runs this once. And then we can go UI controller.instance.endGame, which we will create in a second. Make sure you save that, and we'll head back into the UI controller where we can create it. So let's create a public void endGame. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our restart panel dot set active to true. Then we can set our game controller dot game paused equal to true. So that'll pause everything. For now, we're going to set our game controller dot distance equal to 0, so it doesn't keep going up. We're going to set our game controller dot enemy count equal to 0, and we also want to remove all of the enemies in our game because we don't want to be attacked by more enemies, and we don't want more enemies to be spawned. So let's firstly remove all of the enemies. So for each game object enemy in game object dot find game objects with tag enemy, as this finds an array of enemies. And so for each enemy in our array of enemies, we're going to go enemy dot set active to false. And also we want to reset their health, so we can also go enemy dot get component health component dot reset health. This is to make sure that if we die when we're attacking an enemy, the enemy's health goes back to its max health for when it gets spawned again in the future, and then we'll set it to false. So now we need to open up our object spawner, and this is because we want to make sure that we are only spawning objects when our game controller is, or when our game is not paused. So we can just put an and not game controller dot game paused here. All this is fine. We need to go to our move component, and we want all of this code in the update to also only run when our game is not paused. So if game controller dot game paused, and make sure we put exclamation mark for the not, so long as we're not paused, we want all of the different objects that we control to move. We also need to update our player movement. So we only want to be updating our attacking if the game is not paused. So if not, game controller dot game paused. And we will also wrap that around in curly brackets. So if you hold Control and Alt, you press the down arrow key or the up arrow key, we're going to select all these lines at this position in the code and press tab. And that just is an easy way to tab out your code so it looks sort of nice. Now with that, we should be able to set up everything in the editor and then run our game. So let's test that out. First, let's make sure we don't have any bugs. Sure, looks fine. Now we need to add our start panel. So start panel, restart panel. In our player, we need to add a health component. We can set the max health to 100. In our start panel and restart panel, we need to edit what happens when we try to press the play button or the restart button. So in our start panel, we want our UI controller to start the game. And in our restart panel, we want our UI controller to restart the game. So now let's test that out. Okay, let's hit play. So we've got this updating, got some enemies coming towards us. Now let's see if we can die from the enemies. So you could add some particles for an enemy to attack or an animation. And we don't have any sort of visual feedback, so we don't know. But as you can see, the health has gone down to 0. We've died. It's opened up the restart panel. We click on restart, doesn't restart. And the issue is that when we copied the code over, we didn't make sure it was the restart panel that we're setting active to false. So make sure it's the restart panel. And let's try that one more time. So let's test this out. Play. Just gotta wait a bit for our enemies to come towards us. Can obviously set the distance to be a bit slower, as I stated in my last video. It's all up to you. I'm being attacked right now because the enemies are very close. And now I've died. So if I go to restart now, then we're going back up from 0. Everything's fine, but I think our distance is still updating slightly. So where do we update our distance? In our update void of our UI controller. So we also need to make sure that we have our game controller dot game paused. So make sure that if we're not paused, then we can update all of this stuff. So I'm just gonna tab that out. And now that we've checked that, our game should run pretty smoothly. Now, there are some benefits and disbenefits of creating your restart and start panels this way. I like it because everything's in one scene, so it keeps everything condensed together. It's a little bit harder in the code, a little bit more tedious, but it makes for a smoother gameplay. You don't really have any sort of loading times or lag. Okay, and you can see everything works fine if we restart the game. Still got our everything going, the enemies coming back. And that makes for a nice gameplay loop. So like the video if you thought it was helpful, and let me know in the comments if there's any other sort of features you want to add. Make sure to subscribe for more content. Support me on Patreon if you can. I'd like to thank Benoni's and Joshua for their extended support for my channel. Also join the Discord server if you haven't already, if you want some more help or just want to hang out. And with that being said, I will see you next time. Thanks, guys.